Hello, everyone. Welcome to Z Time. We do zombie stories for survivors. Thanks for listening. On with the tale. Chapter 1. The phone rang while I was on the tractor, which meant I didn't hear it first. I was easing the bucket down along the fence line on the west edge of the property, nudging limestone chunks out of the red clay where they'd worked their way up over the winter. Tennessee soil does that, freezes, thaws, exhales rocks like it's clearing its throat. I'd been at it for 3 hours. Shirt soaked through, diesel engine vibrating up through the seat and into my spine. The kind of work that leaves no room for thinking. When I shut the tractor down to refuel, the quiet rushed back in. Cicadas whined through the tree line. The faint bark of a dog somewhere closer to town. That's when I saw the missed call. Her name sat on the screen longer than it should have. I hadn't saved it as anything poetic. Just Laura. No last name. No heart emoji. No bitterness either. That chapter of my life had been closed neatly, like a rifle case zipped and stowed. Or so I thought. I stood there with a fuel cap in my hand, sun baking the back of my neck, staring at the phone like it might explode. She didn't call me. Not anymore. I wiped my hands on my jeans and called her back. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been staring at her phone too. "Hey," she said. Her voice hadn't changed much, maybe a little tighter around the edges. "Hey," I said. "Everything okay?" There was a pause. Not a dramatic one. A practical pause. The kind people take when they're deciding how honest they're about to be. "I don't know," she said. "That's kind of why I'm calling." I leaned against the tractor tire and listened. She was in Kentucky now. Suburban house. New husband, real estate guy, I remembered. 2-car garage. Good schools. She'd wanted normal. Predictable. After 15 years married to Marine Corps by proxy, I couldn't blame her. "I keep seeing things on the news," she said. "This virus. They're saying it's spreading faster than expected. Hospitals overseas are overwhelmed. The anchors keep smiling while they say it, which freaks me out more than if they didn't." I waited. Let her talk. "I know you still talk to some people," she continued. "From your unit. I wanted to ask, off the record, is this something I should actually be worried about? Or is it just another media thing?" There it was, the thing beneath the thing. I thought about the radio I'd been meaning to turn on that morning. Thought about the way fuel and fencing wire were suddenly harder to find in town. Thought about the look on the cashier's face at the feed store when I asked if they had any more bulk salt coming in. "I don't have any official intel," I said, which was true enough, "but I've been paying attention." "To what?" she asked. "Patterns." Another pause. "Do you think I should be extra cautious?" she asked. "Like, more than they're saying?" I looked out over my land. 10 acres of uneven pasture. Tree line on 3 sides. Gravel drive running down to the county road. Quiet. Isolated without being lonely. The kind of place you could disappear into without trying too hard. "I think," I said slowly, "it wouldn't hurt to stock up on basics. Food, meds, water. Keep your car fueled. Nothing crazy." She exhaled. "That's not very comforting." "I'm not trying to comfort you," I said. "I'm trying to be honest." She laughed softly at that. "Yeah, that tracks." We talked a little longer. About nothing important. About how spring was coming in early. About how Kentucky pollen was already coating everything yellow. She didn't mention her husband by name. I didn't ask. Before she hung up, she said, "If you hear anything, will you let me know?" "Yes," I said. No hesitation. After the call ended, I stood there longer than necessary, phone dark in my hand, the weight of the past settling in with the heat. Then I went back to work. That night, after a shower and a can of chili heated on the stove, I turned the TV on for the first time in a week. I don't watch much news. Never have. Too much noise, not enough signal. But noise changes tone before things break, and I wanted to hear it. Every channel was talking about the virus. Different graphics. Different experts. Same phrases repeated like a chant. Out of an abundance of caution. No cause for panic. Monitoring the situation. I muted the TV and watched their faces instead. That's a habit I picked up overseas. People can lie with their mouths. Their eyes are harder to train. They didn't look panicked. Not yet, but they looked tired, overworked, like people being asked to carry water in paper cups. I left the TV on low and pulled the ham radio out from under the counter. It was an older rig, nothing fancy, but I'd rebuilt it myself. New capacitors, clean solder joints, tuned antenna, running up the side of the house and out to the tree line. I powered it up and let it warm. Static at first, then voices. Truckers, hobbyists, a prepper net out of Missouri arguing about case fatality rates like they were fantasy football stats. Then something else. Short transmissions, clipped, local repeaters lighting up with traffic that didn't sound like hobbyists. Emergency management codes, hospital logistics, someone asking for clarification on transport restrictions. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down call signs and timestamps. Old habits die hard. Around midnight, I opened the WhatsApp group. Second platoon, Echo Company last message was a meme about back pain and bad knees. I typed, anyone hearing anything weird about this virus? Not media, real world. The typing indicator popped up almost immediately. Then another and another responses trickled in. Buddy of mine at VA says they're prepping isolation tents. My cousin's a nurse. Hospitals canceling leave. Heard National Guard logistics got bumped to standby. No one said the word bad. They didn't have to. I put the phone down and went outside. The night was clear, stars sharp enough to cut. I climbed a ladder I'd installed along the side of the house and pulled myself up onto the rooftop platform. That had been a winter project. Reinforced joists. Hinged hatch from the inside. Not for anything dramatic. Just a place to see. To watch weather roll in. To think. From up there, I could see the lights of town faint on the horizon. A quiet place. One diner. One gas station. A hardware store that closed at 5. The kind of place where people waved even if they didn't know your name. I wonder how long that would last. I didn't retire here by accident. When I left the Corps, people expected me to go somewhere loud. Texas, Florida, somewhere with a lot of flags and veterans discounts. Instead, I drove until the roads got narrower and the radio stations turned to gospel and static. The farmhouse had been owned by an old couple who'd moved closer to their kids. The place needed work. Roof leaks, fences half-rotted. The barn leaned like it was tired of standing. I liked that. I bought it cash, signed the papers, changed the locks, and started fixing things one problem at a time. The neighbors were distant but polite. A wave at the mailbox, a nod at the feed store. Nobody asked too many questions, which suited me fine. Over the last year, I'd stayed busy. New fencing along the perimeter, woven wire back with T-posts, reinforced corners sunk deep, not to keep people out, mostly to keep future livestock in. The tractor had been a lucky find, old but reliable, easy to fix. I'd rebuilt the hydraulics myself and kept spare belts hanging in the barn. Solar panels went up next. Nothing flashy. Enough to keep the batteries charged, run lights, fridge, radio. The battery bank sat in a ventilated cabinet in the barn workshop, wired clean and labeled. I hate mystery systems. Rainwater collection came after that. Gutters feeding into food-grade tanks. First flush diverters. Gravity-fed filtration backed up by a ceramic filter and iodine tabs just in case. Redundancy is peace of mind. Inside the barn, I cleared a space for a workshop, pegboard, tool chests, spare parts sorted and labeled, welding rig in the corner. I spent more time in there than in the house most days. People in town probably thought I was just another retired guy with too much time. They weren't wrong, but as the news cycle grew louder and the radio grew stranger, the work started to feel less like a hobby and more like rehearsal. The next morning, I drove into town. Not to panic buy, just to observe. The parking lot at the grocery store was fuller than usual for a Tuesday. Inside, people moved a little faster, carts a little fuller. The paper goods aisle had gaps that hadn't been there last week. At the counter, I asked the clerk how business was. She shrugged. People stocking up, I guess. For a storm? I asked. She shook her head. They don't say. At the hardware store. The owner told me he was waiting on a delayed shipment. Truck didn't show, he said. That's new. On the way out of town, I topped off the truck and filled 2 extra cans. The attendant didn't comment. Back home, I unloaded quietly and went back to work. There's comfort in routine when uncertainty creeps in. I spent the afternoon reinforcing the ladder to the roof and checking the hatch seals. Made sure the water filters were clean. Ran a load test on the batteries. As the sun went down, the radio crackled again. More traffic tonight. More urgency. I sat at the workbench, notebook open, listening. Whatever this was, it wasn't nothing. And for the first time since I'd hung up my uniform for good, I felt that old, familiar sensation settle in my chest. Not fear, readiness. Chapter 2, I didn't touch the guns that night. That might sound strange, given everything that had started turning in my head, but I've learned not to mix preparation with emotion. You check weapons when your hands are steady and your thoughts are boring, not when the radio traffic is climbing and your ex-wife's voice is still echoing in your ears. Instead, I slept, or tried to. I woke before dawn, the way I always do, the house still and cool. The world outside hadn't changed overnight. No sirens, no helicopters, no smoke on the horizon. That's how it usually goes. Big things don't announce themselves. They just keep happening until you realize you're already late. Coffee first, then the list. I keep it taped inside a cabinet door in the kitchen. Pencil, not pen. Categories instead of tasks. It's evolved over the last year. Scratched out and rewritten as I figured out what mattered and what didn't. Water, power, food, medical, tools, security. Security comes last for a reason. After breakfast, I walked out the barn and slid the door shut behind me. The smell of oil and old wood settled in around me. This was the space I trusted most. Everything in here had a place. Everything worked or it didn't stay. The gun cabinet stood against the far wall, bolted through the concrete. Nothing fancy. Steel, mechanical lock, no electronics to fail. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat on the stool at the workbench and let the quiet settle. When you've carried weapons professionally, they stop being symbols. They become tools like a wrench or a chainsaw. Useful, dangerous if mishandled, neutral otherwise. Eventually, I stood and opened the cabinet. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. I own fewer guns than most people assume. I don't collect. I curate. First out was the bolt-action rifle. .308. Synthetic stock. Heavy barrel. Glass that cost more than the rifle itself. Not a sniper rifle. Despite what movies like to call anything with a scope. Just a precise, reliable tool meant for distance and clarity. I ran a cloth over stock and checked the action. Clean. Light coat of oil. 0 unchanged. I keep it that way because I hate surprises. That rifle was for observation as much as anything else. Seeing clearly changes decisions. Distance buys time. Time buys options. Next was the AR-15. Nothing exotic. Mid-length gas system. Free-float handguard. Backup irons co-witness with low-power optic. Set up the way you'd expect from someone who doesn't need to impress anyone. I checked the bolt carrier group, wiped carbon, inspected the gas rings out of habit. I don't baby it, but I don't neglect it either. People argue about rifles like they're arguing religion. I've always found that funny. The rifle doesn't care about your ideology. It just wants to be fed decent ammo and kept reasonably clean. Handguns came last. A full-size 9mm that lives in the nightstand. Another compact one for working around the property. Same manual of arms. Same caliber. Same magazines. Consistency matters more than caliber debates ever will. I didn't load anything. I didn't shoulder anything. I just made sure everything was where it should be and locked the cabinet again. Prepared doesn't mean paranoid. It means finished. Food came next. That was easier, less emotional. Numbers and dates don't argue back. The pantry inside the house held the short-term stuff. Things I rotated through regularly. Rice, beans, pasta, canned vegetables, canned meat, peanut butter, cooking oil, salt, sugar. People underestimate salt. They think of it as seasoning. It's preservation. Electrolyte, trade good. I had more than most. Out in the barn, in a sealed corner away from heat and moisture, was a long-term storage. Shelving units anchored to the wall. Everything labeled. Everything dated. Buckets of dry goods with gamma lids. Rice, lentils, rolled oats. Vacuum-sealed bags inside as redundancy. Oxygen absorbers tucked in where they belonged. Canned food stacked by category, not by brand. Protein together. Vegetables together. Fruit together. Rotation schedule taped to the wall. MREs took up one whole shelf. I don't love them. Nobody who's eaten them for months does. But they're dense, shelf-stable, and idiot-proof. You don't need clean water to cook them. You don't need fire. You don't need anything except teeth. I checked the inspection dates and made a note to rotate a few cases sooner than planned. Better to eat them myself than waste them. There was also freeze-dried food, seal number 10 cans with labels that promised 25-year shelf life, like it was some kind of magic spell. I trust them, mostly, but promises are easier to make than keep. The chest freezer hummed quietly in the corner, powered through the solar system with battery backup. Venison from last season, chicken, frozen vegetables. Not forever food, but useful while power still behaved. I ran the numbers in my head. Alone, I could stretch what I had for a long time. Longer if I stayed disciplined. Much longer if I started producing instead of just consuming. The land could handle a garden easily. I'd already tilled a plot near the south fence. Soil amendments were stacked and waiting. Chickens had been the next step. Maybe goats after that. That plan didn't change. But the timeline might. By midday, the radio was louder. Not literally. The volume knob stayed where it was. But the tone had shifted again. More official voices now. Less chatter. I caught snippets of discussions about staffing shortages, about transport delays, about protocol adjustments. Words like that are meant to calm. They don't. I sent another message to the group chat. Anyone else noticing supply hiccups locally? Responses came back faster this time. Yeah, pharmacies limiting refills. My town canceled the festival. Said it was out of caution. Guard unit got told to review mobilization procedures. I closed the app and stared at the wall. There's a point where information stops helping and starts distracting. I'd reached it. The rest of the day, I worked the land. Physical labor has a way of burning excess thought out of your system. I ran the tractor, cleared brush, checked fence tension, fixed a sagging gate hinge that had been bothering me for months. Late afternoon, I drove perimeter on foot, just walking and listening. No smoke, no unfamiliar vehicles, just birds and wind, and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. Normal. That's what always messes people up. They expect the end of things to look different. That evening, as the sun dropped and the temperature followed it down, I sat on the porch with a bowl of rice and canned beef and watched the sky go orange. I thought about Laura, about her calling not because she thought I had answers, but because she knew I wouldn't lie to make her feel better. I wondered if she'd take my advice, if she was filling her pantry right now, if her new husband thought she was overreacting. I hope he was wrong. Inside, the radio kept murmuring. Inside, the battery stayed full. Inside, the cabinet stayed locked. Everything was ready, and that was the problem. Because when you've done all the sensible things and the world is still quiet, there's nothing left to do but wait. And waiting has always been the hardest part. Chapter 3, the first thing to change in town wasn't the shelves. It was the way people talked. I noticed it 2 days later, standing in line at the feed store. Same place I've been 100 times. Same bell on the door. Same smell of grain and oil and dust baked into floorboards. Different tone. 2 men ahead of me were arguing quietly. Too quietly for what they were saying. Saw online they're shutting highways out west. That's bullshit. Maybe. But my cousin says everyone pretends not to listen in a small town. Nobody ever actually stops. The owner rang them up faster than usual, jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the door every time it opened. When it was my turn, he looked relieved in the way people do when they recognize a face they trust. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I answered. He didn't ask what I needed, just waited. Any word on feed shipments? I asked. He shook his head. Delayed again. Trucks are running short drivers. Temporary? I asked. He shrugged. Everything is temporary until it isn't. That was new. He'd always been an optimist. I paid and stepped back outside, leaning against the post by the door. From there, I could see the parking lot. More pickups than usual. More people sitting in their cabs after loading up, scrolling on phones instead of leaving. Nobody panicking, but nobody relaxed either. I drove home slow, windows down, radio off. At the edge of town, a digital sign outside the clinic flashed a new message. Masks required. Limited appointments. I filed that away. That afternoon, the sheriff drove past my place. Didn't stop, didn't slow, just rolled by, dust curling behind his tires. He waved. I waved back. The wave mattered more than anything else. In places like this, law enforcement doesn't start with authority. It starts with recognition. When that changes, when a wave turns into a look or stops altogether, you know the ground is shifting. I spent the rest of the day doing small things. The kind you put off when everything feels normal. Sharpened tools. Replaced worn hoses. Checked the spare parts inventory in the barn. And made a list of what I couldn't fabricate myself. I moved fuel cans into the shade and rotated the oldest into the truck. Labeled everything again, even though it was already labeled. Repetition isn't paranoia. It's insurance. As the sun dropped, the ham radio crackled louder than I liked. Local repeaters were busy now. Not just hobby chatter. County-level traffic bleeding through. A hospital administrator asking about generator fuel. Someone from emergency management requesting volunteer coordination details. I didn't transmit. Listening tells you more. Around 9 p.m., the power flickered. Just a blink. Less than a second. But my lights didn't even dim. The batteries took the load without complaint. That settled something in my chest I hadn't realized was still unsettled. I shut the main breaker off anyway. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to know what it felt like. The house went quiet. No hum. No fridge cycling. Just wind and insects of my own breathing. I turned the breaker back on 10 minutes later. Still fine. I slept better that night than I had in days. The next morning, Laura texted me. They just closed schools here for 2 weeks. Is that normal? I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then I typed back, no. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Should we leave? She asked. That was the question people ask when they already know the answer, but don't like it. I thought about her house. Subdivision. Neighbors 10 feet away. Stores just in time stocked by trucks that were already running thin. I thought about my place. Space. Quiet. Fences. If you go, I typed, go early, and go somewhere you trust. She didn't reply right away. When she did, it was just, okay. I set the phone down and felt the weight of it settle. Not responsibility. She'd made her choices long ago. Just gravity. Past and present pulling against each other. Outside, a pickup I didn't recognize slowed as it passed my driveway. Didn't stop. Didn't wave. I memorized it anyway. By the end of the week, the shelves were changing. Not empty. Just curated. Less variety. Fewer options. Whole sections quietly missing. The kind of absence you don't notice until you're looking for something specific. At the gas station, there was a handwritten sign taped to the pump. Please limit to 10 gallons, no explanation. At the diner, half the tables were empty, but the ones that were filled stayed occupied longer than usual. People nursing coffee, talking low, phones face up like they might ring with instructions. I took my breakfast to go. Back home, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, just a line in the sand. I stopped going into town unless I had to. No more casual trips. No more browsing. If I went, it was in, out, done. I didn't want to be part of the background noise when things got louder. I topped off everything one last time. Fuel, water tanks, freezer, and then I settled in. That evening, I climbed up to the rooftop platform again. From there, I could see headlights moving along the county road. More than usual. Some heading toward town. Some away. Migration starts small. The radio murmur behind me through the open hatch. Words like containment and resource prioritization floated up into the night air. I rested my hands on the railing and watched the dark. This was the phase people never remember clearly afterward. The in-between, when everything still works, but everyone knows it might not for long. No gunfire, no riots, no sirens screaming through the night. Just choices being made quietly behind closed doors. And the knowledge, clear and steady, that once the next line was crossed, there would be no going back to how things were. I stayed up there until the stars blurred and the air went cold. When I finally climbed down and locked the hatch behind me, it felt less like going inside for the night and more like closing a door. Chapter for the knock came mid-morning. Not a pound, not a timid tap either. Just firm enough to be deliberate. I was in the barn, elbow deep in a battery cabinet, tightening a terminal that didn't need tightening. The sound carried anyway. Out here, everything carries. I froze, not because I was afraid, but because unexpected things demand full attention. I shut the cabinet, wiped my hands, and stepped outside. Didn't rush, didn't linger, just walked a long way around so I could see the driveway before I was seeing myself. It was a neighbor from 2 properties down, the one with the aging pickup, and the pasture that never quite recovered from last summer's drought. Mid-50s. Name was Tom, I thought. We'd spoken maybe 3 times in a year. He stood by his truck, hat in his hands, eyes scanning the tree line like he wasn't sure which direction counted as polite. I raised a hand and walked up. "Morning," I said. He looked relieved. "Morning. Hope I'm not bothering you." "You're not," I said, which was true, but only just. He hesitated, then went for it. "You hear anything?" "Official?" There it was again. That word. "About?" I asked, letting him finish. He gestured vaguely toward town, toward the world. All this. I considered him. Calloused hands. No panic in his eyes, just uncertainty. The kind that wants to anchor itself to something solid. "I hear what everyone hears," I said, and a little more radio traffic than usual. He nodded like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "They're saying deliveries might stop for a while," he said. "My wife's worried." "Wives usually are," I said. He managed a small smile. "Yeah." We stood there a moment. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was evaluative. "I noticed you've been busy," he said finally, nodding toward the barn, the fencing, the panels glinting on the roof. I shrugged. "Keeps me occupied." He shifted his weight. "If things get weird." I figure it might be good to know who's nearby. That was the ask. Soft but real. I didn't answer right away. Community is a force multiplier, but it's also a liability if you don't choose it carefully. You don't say yes out of politeness. You don't say no out of fear. You say what you can sustain. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," I said, "and I don't bother folks who don't bother me." He nodded again, slower this time. "That's fair," he said. "Just thought I'd introduce myself proper." We shook hands. His grip was solid. That mattered. When he drove off, I watched until the truck disappeared around the bend. Then I went back to the barn and locked the door behind me. That afternoon, the county sent out an alert. Not an emergency alert, just a notification. Voluntary curfew requested after 9 p.m. non-essential travel. Discouraged voluntary was doing a lot of work there. I didn't need a curfew. I hadn't gone anywhere after dark in weeks. What mattered was what came next. On the radio, a voice I hadn't heard before came on, calm, rehearsed, practiced. Local repeaters are requested to keep channels clear for emergency traffic. That was the first time I heard the word requested used like an order. I shut the radio off. Too much input dulls your edge. Instead, I went through the house. Windows locked. Motion lights tested. Doors checked. Not in a paranoid way. Just confirmation, like pre-flight. I didn't barricade anything. Barricades scream fear. They also invite curiosity. I cooked dinner early. Ate simply. Washed the dishes immediately. Normal things matter when abnormal ones are circling. That night, I heard the first siren from town. Just one. Distant. Brief. I didn't move. Sometime after midnight, headlights swept across the tree line and paused. I was awake already. The vehicle idled for maybe 10 seconds. Then it moved on. Could have been nothing. Probably was. Still, I wrote it down. The next day, Laura called again. This time, she didn't bother with small talk. "We're packing," she said. "He doesn't want to, but I told him I'm not waiting." "Good," I said. "We're thinking of heading south," she continued. "Somewhere quieter." I almost laughed. Almost. "Quiet fills up fast," I said. "If you go, don't announce it." She was quiet for a beat. "Are you saying we shouldn't come there?" I closed my eyes. This was the line I'd known was coming. "I'm saying," I said carefully, "that wherever you go, you should already be welcome." She understood. Laura always did. "I figured," she said. "I just had to ask." "I know." She hesitated. "Are you?" "Okay. Out there alone." I looked out at the land, the fences, the barn, the sky. "Yes," I said. "I'm okay." She let out a breath. "I thought you'd say that." When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Some things can't be revisited. Not safely. By the end of the week, the voluntary curfew wasn't voluntary anymore. The sheriff came by that evening. This time he stopped. We talked by the fence. About nothing important. About the weather. About keeping an eye out for each other. He didn't ask about weapons. Didn't ask about supplies. That told me more than if he had. Before he left, he said, "If you hear anything odd on your radios, you know where to find me." "I do," I said. After he drove away, I stood there until the dust settled. Authority was still intact, but it was stretched thin. That's when people start testing boundaries. That's when preparation stops being theoretical. I went inside, shut the door, and checked the locks one more time. Not because I was afraid. Because the knock that matters isn't always the first one. And when the next one came, I wanted to be sure I'd already decided how to answer it. Chapter 5 fortifications are a funny thing. People imagine walls, sandbags, watchtowers, something obvious enough to photograph from a distance, and feel impressed by. That kind of thinking gets you noticed long before it keeps you safe. I didn't build walls. I changed the way the place behaved. The idea came to me while I was standing at the kitchen sink, looking out at the driveway. It curves just enough near the road that you can't see the house until you're already committed. I'd liked that when I bought the place. Privacy, seclusion. Now I saw it differently. Commitment cuts both ways. I started with light. Not more of it, less. That night, I walked the property and turned off anything that spilled outward. Porch light went dark. Barn light stayed internal. Motion light stayed, but I adjusted their angles so they illuminated ground, not distance. I wanted to see movement, not advertised location. Inside, I rearranged furniture subtly. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to open lines of sight that hadn't been there before. Windows stayed uncovered during the day, but at night they vanished behind heavy curtains I'd installed months ago without really thinking why. Old habits have a way of justifying themselves later. I moved nothing that would make the house look defensive from the outside. No plywood. No barricades. From the road, it still looked like a quiet man's quiet farmhouse. That was the point. The barn got more attention. I didn't reinforce it to turn it into a stronghold. I reinforced it to make it uninteresting. Doors closed cleanly. No gaps of light. No visible activity after dusk. People gravitate towards certainty, good or bad. Ambiguity makes them hesitate. Inside the barn, I reorganized. Tools that made noise moved deeper in. Anything that reflected light got dulled or covered. The generator stayed where it was. But I rerouted the exhaust farther back through the tree line. Sound travels differently at night. I tested it once, just after sunset. Walked the fence line while it ran. From 50 yards, you couldn't hear it at all. That satisfied me. The driveway was next. I didn't block it, didn't gate it, didn't do anything that would make a delivery truck or a patrol car stop and ask questions. I just made it less convenient. Loose gravel redistributed. Shallow ruts left uncorrected. The kind of thing you notice when you're unfamiliar with the terrain. The kind of thing that makes you slow down. Speed is comfort. Slowness creates vulnerability. I marked reference points only I would recognize. A rock out of place. A fence tie turned the wrong way. Nothing obvious. Just enough to tell me, at a glance, if something had changed while I was asleep. That night, I slept with the windows cracked. Not because it was warm, but because sound tells you more when it's not muffled. Sometime after midnight, a vehicle passed on the county road, faster than most. Didn't slow. I didn't move. There's a difference between awareness and reaction. Knowing which one you're in keeps you alive longer. The first real scarcity showed up the next morning. I knew before I heard it on the radio. The fridge cycled longer than usual. Not because it was failing, but because the outside air was warmer than it should have been for that time of year. And the grid was under strain. Then the radio confirmed it. Rolling outages expected in some regions. They didn't say which regions. They never do. I shut off everything non-essential and watched the battery displays settle into a steady, predictable draw. Predictability is comfort when systems start to stutter. Later that day, someone pulled into the driveway. I saw them before they saw me. Sedan, older, paint faded, windows down. They stopped short of the house and sat there, engine idling. I stayed in the barn, door cracked just enough to see. Eventually, the driver got out. Man in his 30s, maybe, clothes clean but worn. The look of someone who hadn't slept enough. He called out, "Hey, anybody home?" I waited. Silence does more work than shouting ever will. After a moment, I stepped into view, not from the house, from the side, where I'd chosen. "Can I help you?" I asked. He startled a little. Not badly, just enough to tell me he hadn't expected resistance. "Yeah," he said. "Sorry to bother you. I ran out of gas. That was possible. It was also the first bad decision I'd seen up close. People don't run out of gas accidentally when they're worried. They run out when they've already ignored too many signs. "I don't have extra," I said, which was a lie, but a sustainable one. He looked past me toward the house, toward the barn, cataloging. "I heard folks out here might be more prepared," he said. I didn't answer. He shifted. "I've got cash." "That won't help you," I said. He stood there a moment longer, weighing something. Then he nodded. "All right, worth asking." He got back in the car and drove away. Slowly, carefully, like someone who just learned a lesson and wasn't sure what to do with it yet. I watched until he was gone. Then I walked the driveway and checked every marker. Nothing disturbed. Still, I adjusted things that evening. Not fortifications, filters, paths that looked open but weren't, spaces that funneled attention where I wanted it, a place where I could see without being seen. I didn't create choke points. I created pauses. That night, the sheriff's radio traffic spiked. Not emergencies, arguments, calls that didn't resolve cleanly, a stolen generator, a fight over fuel, a misunderstanding at the grocery store, social friction. That's the real warning sign. Not violence, but impatience. I sat at the workbench and cleaned one of the rifles slowly, methodically, not because it needed it, because it centered me. Fortification isn't about turning your home into a bunker. It's about reducing the number of decisions you have to make when you're tired, stressed, or surprised. By the time I turned the lights out, there were fewer of those decisions left than there had been the day before. That meant I was doing it right. Outside, the land stayed quiet. Inside, everything waited. And somewhere between the fences and the dark, I could feel the shape of what was coming, not like fear, but like pressure, steady, relentless, unavoidable. Chapter 6, the news changed its language first. Not all at once. Just enough that you noticed if you've been listening long enough. They stopped saying virus by itself and started adding qualifiers. Neurological complications, post-mortem activity, extreme agitation. That last one came up a lot. I was eating breakfast when the first unblurred video aired. They warned before showing it. A clean, calm anchor voice telling viewers that what followed might be disturbing. That was new too. They hadn't warned us about anything in a long time. The footage was shaky. Vertical phone video. A street somewhere I didn't recognize. People shouting in a language I didn't speak, but Panic doesn't need translation. A man was on the ground. He wasn't moving the way injured people move. He was still, too still. Someone bent down to help him. Then he wasn't still anymore. The anchor cut away quickly, but not before the man on the ground lunged, fast, awkward, wrong, and sank his teeth into the helper's forearm. The studio went silent for half a beat too long. I turned the TV off. I didn't need commentary. The radio filled the gaps. Emergency channels were no longer trying to sound calm. They were trying to sound clear, which is different. Calm reassures. Clarity prepares. I heard reports of patients reviving after being pronounced dead, of responders backing away because pain compliance wasn't working, of violent outbursts that didn't stop when they should have. One transmission cut off mid-sentence. Then there was yelling in the background. Then static. I wrote the time down anyway. On the handbands. People were talking openly now. No hedging. No pretending this was temporary. They don't respond to tasers. Shot him twice, and he didn't slow. Only stop when that last one came up again and again, phrased differently each time. Stopped when the head was destroyed. No one said it like advice. They said it like a terrible fact you wish weren't true. Town felt different after that. Not louder. Quieter. I drove in once more, against my better judgment, just to see it with my own eyes. Curiosity is dangerous, but ignorance is worse. The diner was closed. Handwritten sign taped to the door. Temporarily closed. Stay Safe the grocery store had a deputy posted out front, not directing traffic. Just standing there, hands on his belt, watching people move like he was counting breaths. Inside, the mood had curdled. People weren't just stocking up anymore. They were arguing about masks, about whether bites transmitted it, about whether it was airborne, about whether the dead were really dead. I heard the word reanimation spoken out loud by a woman, clutching a basket of canned soup like a life raft. Another man laughed too loudly and said, "That's movie bullshit." No one laughed with him. At the counter, a TV was playing live footage from a city. Police vehicles blocking an intersection. A crowd pressed back behind tape. Something moving between them. The camera zoomed. The person walking toward the barricade was missing part of their face. They didn't slow. Didn't stumble. Didn't react to the shouting or the warning shots. They kept coming until someone fired again, this time higher. The body dropped. Didn't move. No anchor voice rushed in to soften it. The feed cut. I left my basket where it was and walked out. On the drive home, I passed something I hadn't seen before. A car pulled over on the shoulder. Driver's door open. No one around. I slowed but didn't stop. I looked. There was blood on the doorframe. Not sprayed. Smeared. Like someone had leaned there. A shape moved in the trees just beyond the ditch. I didn't wait to see more. The engine roared louder than it needed to. Back at the house, I shut the gate behind me for the first time. Not locked, just closed. A signal more than a barrier. That night, the internet finally caught up with reality. Social media was a wall of clips and rumors and arguments. Some real, some fake. All loud. People debated whether the infected were still people, whether they could be reasoned with, whether they felt pain. The videos answered that last one better than any argument ever could. One clip showed a man missing half a leg, dragging himself across pavement, fingers worn down to bone. He didn't scream, didn't slow, didn't even look at the wound. Another showed 3 officers backing away, firing, shouting, until one of them slipped. The thing that reached him didn't hesitate. The comments beneath were worse than the footage. Denial is loud when it's cornered. I shut the internet down. Late that evening, Tom, the neighbor, called out from the fence line. I stepped out onto the porch. "You seeing this?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said. "They saying on the news that the dead." "I know," I said. He swallowed. "They saying it spreads by bites." "And blood," I added. "Maybe more." He stared at the ground. "What happens if someone dies out here?" That was the question nobody wanted to ask. I didn't answer it directly. "We'll know soon enough," I said. That didn't comfort him. It didn't comfort me either. That night, I locked the doors. All of them. I turned the exterior motion lights back on, but narrowed further. controlled, purposeful. I moved the radio closer to bed. Somewhere after midnight, distant gunshots echoed from the direction of town. Not a lot, not sustained, just enough to mark a before and an after. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the phrase that kept surfacing across every channel, every conversation. Impervious to pain. Pain is how the world teaches limits. Take that away, and all you have left is momentum. Whatever this virus had done, it hadn't just made people sick. It had taken something fundamental away. Sleep didn't come easily after that, because the problem wasn't that the infected were violent. The problem was that they were persistent, and persistence changes everything. Chapter 7, the first breach didn't happen at my place. That's important. If it had, this would be a different story, shorter, louder, messier. Instead, it happened close enough to feel, but far enough to watch. That distance is what killed denial. It started with smoke. Not thick, not dramatic, just a thin, gray smear rising above the trees in the direction of town, visible from the rooftop platform, if you knew where to look. I noticed it mid-morning while checking the water tanks. Smoke without sirens is never a good sign. The radio confirmed it an hour later. Structure fire. Unknown cause. Limited response. Limited response. That was new. I stayed off the air and listened. Apparently, a man had barricaded himself inside his house with his wife after she was bitten. Neighbors reported screams. Then silence. Then movement at the windows. Someone tried to help. Someone else panicked. Someone set something on fire. By the time the volunteer department arrived, the house was already compromised, and so were the people around it. They didn't use the word infected over the radio. They used subjects. That's how you know training has kicked in. Language hardens when empathy becomes dangerous. By noon, the county issued another alert. This one wasn't polite. Shelter in place, do not approach injured individuals, do not attempt first aid. That last line hit harder than anything else. First aid is reflex. It's instinct. It's how decent people behave. Telling people not to help each other is an admission of failure on a societal level. I shut the phone off after that, not because I didn't care, but because I already knew what it meant for me. Isolation was no longer a side effect of where I lived. It was a choice. That afternoon, Tom came back. This time, he didn't stop at the fence. He stood just inside the line, hands raised slightly, like he didn't want to startle anything, including me. They burned a house, he said. I know, I answered. My cousin was there, he continued. Not inside. Nearby. He said the people inside didn't come out, even when it was burning. I didn't respond. There are things you let hang in the air. They're saying if someone goes down, he said, voice cracking now, you don't touch them. You don't even get close. That's right, I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. You were military, he said. You've seen bad things. Yes. What do we do? That question has ended more conversations than it's ever started. I chose my words carefully. You keep distance, I said. You reduce exposure. You don't improvise heroics. That's it. That's a lot, I said. He nodded slowly, like someone tried to fit a new rule into an old worldview. What if it comes out here? He asked. I looked past him, over the fields, toward the road. Then we'll know it, I said. He left not long after. Didn't ask to stay. Didn't ask for supplies. That told me something good about him. The internet went quiet that evening. Not silent, quiet. Live streams dropped. Comment sections locked. Platforms throttled uploads for verification. Verification lagged reality. Always has. The TV showed official statements now. Governors, agency heads, people standing behind podiums with flags and tight smiles. They said the infection caused extreme aggression, loss of higher cognitive function, and post-mortem motor activity. They did not say dead, but everyone understood. Footage from overseas filled the gaps. Streets abandoned. Military vehicles blocking intersections. Bodies moving when they shouldn't. One clip showed a man struck by a car. Hard. Thrown yards. He stood up anyway. No limp. No hesitation. Just turned and charged. The camera operator dropped the phone. The feed went dark. I turned the TV off again. At dusk, I walked the property. Slow, methodical. Every fence line, every corner, every shadow. Nothing had changed. That was both comforting and unsettling. I shut the gate and locked it for the first time. Not because a lock would stop anything that really wanted in. Because symbols matter to you if no one else. Inside, I moved through the house in the dark without turning lights on. Let my eyes adjust, listen to the structure creak, and settle like it always had. I checked the radio. Emergency traffic was constant now, not frantic, saturated. Too many calls, too many unknowns. One voice stood out. Young, shaking. They keep coming, he said. They don't stop. They don't stop. Someone cut him off. Protocol doesn't like emotion on open channels. I shut it down. That night, something screamed. Not close, not distant. Somewhere in between. Human, but stripped of everything that makes the sound meaningful. No words, no fear, just raw exertion. I stood at the window and watched the dark. Nothing moved, no lights, no figures. But the sound lingered, echoing against the tree line, fading slowly like it didn't know when to quit. That's when it fully settled in. This wasn't disaster that would peak and pass. This wasn't something you rode out for a few weeks with canned food and patience. This was a permanent change in how the world enforced consequences. If someone fell, really fell, they didn't leave the board. They became something else. Something that didn't negotiate, didn't exhaust, didn't retreat. Something that would eventually find you if you left enough traces behind. I stepped away from the window and sat at the table. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the map. Town, roads, neighbors, tree lines. Isolation wasn't just about staying put anymore. It was about being forgettable. And that meant the next phase wouldn't be about fortifying against attack. It would be about making sure nothing ever had a reason to come looking. Chapter 8, the first one didn't announce itself. No screaming. No crashing through brush. No dramatic moment where instinct had time to warm up. I saw it because something else was wrong first. A crow landed on the fence post near the east pasture just after sunrise. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that it stayed there, head cocked, not calling, just watching the ground like it was waiting for something to finish dying. Crows don't wait unless there's certainty involved. I lifted the binoculars and scanned the tree line. Nothing. I watched the crow again. It hopped once, wings half open, agitated. Then I saw the movement. A shape stepping out of the trees, not rushing, not stalking, just walking. Badly. It was a woman, or had been. Clothes torn but not ragged enough to suggest long travel. One shoe missing, the other flapping uselessly against the heel. Her arms hung at angles that didn't match each other, one shoulder lower than the other like something inside had given up on symmetry. She wasn't looking around. She was following the fence, hand trailing along the wire, fingers catching and slipping as she moved. I lowered the binoculars and didn't breathe for a moment. Distance matters. Context matters more. She hadn't come from town. Wrong direction. She'd come from the back roads. Maybe from one of the smaller properties farther out. Maybe from a car that never made it home. She stopped at the corner post and turned. Not toward the house. Toward the barn. That's when I understood something important. She wasn't hunting. She was drifting. The infected weren't predators in the way people imagined. No cunning. No coordination. Just momentum and stimulus. Sound. Movement. Contrast. Left alone, they wandered until something pulled them like a hook through the brain. I stayed still. No radio. No movement. No sound. The crow lifted off, offended by my patience. The woman shuffled closer to the barn fence and stopped again. Her head tilted slightly, not curious, not alert, just recalibrating. Then she walked straight into the wire. No hesitation. She pushed forward until the fence bowed and snapped her back, then did it again, and again. No reaction to pain, no frustration, no learning, just persistence. I watched the fence strain and then hold. That mattered too. Eventually, She turned away, not because the fence repelled her, but because something else had stolen her attention. A sound I couldn't hear, a cue I couldn't feel. She drifted back toward the trees and disappeared the same way she'd come. I waited another full hour before I moved. I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. This wasn't about defense in the dramatic sense. No last stands. No heroic holds. It was about friction. Every barrier didn't need to stop them forever. It just needed to slow them long enough for their attention to slide somewhere else. Fences weren't walls. They were conversations. And these things were very bad listeners. By afternoon, the internet was almost useless. Too many clips. Too many edits. Too many people discovering the same truths at different speeds and screaming them into the void. One video looped everywhere. A man pinned under a fallen shelf in a warehouse. 3 infected clawing at him. He screamed until his voice broke. They ignored it, one of them missing an arm, jaw hanging loose, still biting with whatever leverage it had left. The comments beneath it weren't fear anymore. They were strategy debates, ethics debates, philosophy debates. That's how you know society is in free fall, when people argue theory while practice eats them alive. On the TV, officials finally said out loud, if an individual has expired and exhibits reanimation, they are no longer considered salvageable. Salvageable, not alive. That word didn't come from nowhere. It came from rooms where doctors and commanders had argued until language itself had failed. They confirmed what everyone already knew. Bites transmitted it. Blood exposure likely did. Scratches maybe. Airborne unknown but unlikely. And then the line that settled everything. Neutralization requires catastrophic trauma to the brain. No euphemism. No softening. Head trauma kills them. Nothing else reliably does. I shut the TV off and left it off. That evening, gunfire echoed again from town. This time it wasn't isolated. It was staggered, different calibers, different rhythms. Some people were learning faster than others. The sheriff came on the radio briefly. All residents advised to remain indoors. Deputies are prioritizing active threats only. Active threats only. Translation: you're on your own unless you're already dying loudly. Tom didn't come by that night. Neither did anyone else. Lights flickered across the valley. Houses going dark one by one, either from outages or decisions. I stayed dark. Just after midnight, I heard something at the fence again. Not pushing this time. Dragging. Slow, irregular scraping. I didn't go to the window. I went to the roof. From there, I could see the pasture in fragments, moonlight breaking into patches. The fence line glinted where wire caught silver. A shape was tangled near the corner post. Another one. This one hadn't figured out how to turn away. It pulled and twisted, caught between posts, wire biting into rotten clothing and dead flesh alike. It didn't scream. It didn't curse. It just worked, endlessly. I watched long enough to understand something else. Left like this, it would stay there until it tore itself apart, or until something living came close enough to matter. That was the problem with persistence. It creates landmarks. I climbed down without turning on a light. Inside, I sat at the table and rested my hands flat on the wood. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't excited. I was adjusting. The world had changed its rules, and now it was my turn to decide how I'd operate within them. Tomorrow, I'd have to deal with the fence. Not to fortify it, but to erase evidence. Because the worst thing you could be now wasn't weak. It was noticed. Chapter 9 morning came slow and gray, like it was unsure it wanted to show up at all. I didn't sleep much. Not because of fear, but because unresolved things hum in the back of your head until you deal with them. The fence corner sat there in my thoughts like an unfinished sentence. I made coffee. Strong. Black. Let it ground me. Then I went outside. The pasture was quiet. Too quiet for something that had been working all night. I approached the corner carefully, not creeping, not rushing, just aware. The wire was bent inward, tension uneven. The shape caught and it was still there. Closer now, details resolved. It had been a man, middle-aged, work boots still on, one pant leg shredded to the knee. The skin beneath was gray and split, not bleeding. His face was slack. jaw hanging open like it had forgotten what it was for. One arm was wrapped uselessly in the wire. The other clawed forward again and again, fingernails torn away, fingers worn raw to bone. When he sensed me, not saw his movements sharpened, not faster, just more focused, head lifting, teeth clicking once, twice. No recognition, no anger, just function. I stopped well outside reach and stood there longer than I meant to. This was the first time I'd been close enough to smell it. Not rot, exactly. Something sour and metallic, like old blood and wet earth. This wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was a problem. Left here, it would draw attention. Birds, animals, maybe other infected. Problems multiply when you ignore them. I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel righteous. I felt responsible for the land, for the boundaries I'd chosen to maintain, for the future version of myself that would have to live with whatever I did next. I went back to the barn and closed the door behind me. I sat on the stool and breathed until my hands stopped shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline finally realizing it had somewhere to go. I told myself something simple. This isn't punishment. This isn't justice. This is maintenance. That framing mattered. When I went back out, I didn't rush. I didn't speak to it. I didn't apologize. What I did was decisive, but not dramatic. There was no struggle, no final moment of understanding, just a sudden absence of motion where motion had refused to stop. When it was over, the pasture felt different, not lighter, just settled. I stood there for a long time afterward, listening to my own breathing, letting the reality of it anchor itself somewhere permanent. This was the irreversible choice, not the act itself, but the acceptance that there would be more. Disposal took longer. Not physically, mentally. I worked methodically, deliberately, correcting the fence afterward until it looked untouched. No broken wire. No obvious sign that anything had ever tested it. By the time I finished, the sun was high enough to burn the chill away. I washed up at the outdoor spigot, scrubbing until the smell was gone, then scrubbing once more anyway. Inside, I wrote the date down. Not details, just the date. That mattered too. The radio was quieter that afternoon. Not calmer, thinner. Too many voices had dropped out on the emergency channels. I heard confirmation of multiple containment failures in nearby counties. Hospitals overwhelmed. Evacuations aborted. Law enforcement shifting to area denial. Area denial is a phrase that assumes you already know what it costs. On the ham bands, people spoke in smaller groups now. Less speculation. More checking in. Still here. Made it through the night. Lost contact with... I didn't transmit. Not yet. Tom didn't come by that day. But his wife did. She stayed by the fence, eyes red, hands shaking. "Have you seen him?" she asked. I knew what she meant. I chose my words carefully. "I haven't seen anyone come through here today." I said. It wasn't a lie. She nodded, biting her lip. If he doesn't, she couldn't finish. "I'll keep an eye out," I said. She thanked me like I'd promised more than I had. When she left, I watched her until she disappeared down the road. Then I sat on the porch and stared at the fence corner. Some truths arrived gently. Others demand payment up front. That night I slept deeply, not because things were better, but because they were clearer. The man who'd retired here to be alone was still alone. But he wasn't pretending anymore. He understood the rules now, and he knew, with a certainty that didn't waver, that if something crossed his boundary again, infected or otherwise, the decision wouldn't feel new. It would feel familiar. And that, more than anything else, scared me. Chapter 10, the infected weren't the only ones learning. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, overheard transmissions, half-finished sentences, the way certain words started showing up together more often than they should have. Clearing, perimeter, secured. Those words belong to people who intend to stay. I heard the first solid mention on the radio 3 days after the fence. A calm voice, older, disciplined. Grid search completed. 3 structures cleared. 2 recoveries. 1 compromised. No call signs I recognized. No emergency tone. Just matter-of-fact reporting. Someone asked where. The reply came after a pause. County line, east of the river. Moving slow. Moving slow. That's not panic. That's planning. The news finally admitted what the internet already knew. Some areas weren't just failing. They were being abandoned. Evacuation corridors had collapsed under their own weight. Shelters had turned into amplification points for infection. The phrase controlled burn slipped out of a general's mouth during a briefing and was never fully explained afterward. Maps appeared on screen with colors that changed daily. Green shrank. Yellow flickered. Red spread like a bruise. Rural areas were still mostly green, but the edges were getting fuzzy. The anchor said, authorities urge residents to cooperate with local security efforts. Local security efforts. That could mean anything. Tom came by that afternoon. He didn't stop at the fence this time. He stood back, visible, hands empty, posture careful. I met him halfway. They came through the north road, he said without preamble. Group of about 10. Armed. Organized. Who? I asked. He shook his head. Didn't say. They asked questions. Wanted to know who lived where, who had supplies, who had skills. And you told them? I asked. He hesitated. Some, he said, not about you. That earned him a nod. What did they say they were doing? I asked. Making things safe, he replied. That phrase landed heavy. From what? I asked. He swallowed. Everything. I thought about that long after he left. Making things safe sounds good. It always does. But safety, like security, is a word that changes shape depending on who's holding it. A group that clears infected is useful. A group that decides who gets to stay is something else entirely. That evening, I climbed to the roof again. From there, I could see farther than usual, dust plumes in the distance, faint lights at odd hours, movement where there had been none before. Not chaos, coordination. The infected wandered, people maneuvered, which meant the next phase wouldn't be about avoiding attention. It would be about managing it. The radio confirmed it the next morning. A new voice had taken over one of the repeaters. Confident, polite, structured. This is a general broadcast. We're establishing safe zones for uninfected residents. Cooperation ensures protection. No authority cited. No badge flashed. Just certainty. I shut the radio off. Certainty without accountability is dangerous. I went about my day anyway. Fix a hinge. Check the batteries. Water the garden plot I'd finally planted, even though it felt absurd to think about harvest when the world was still burning around the edges. But life doesn't wait for permission. Midday I saw the first patrol. 3 vehicles, moving slow along the county road. Not military, not police. Civilian trucks, reinforced, marked with white paint symbols I didn't recognize. They didn't stop. They didn't wave. They looked. I stayed inside. Let the house remain just another quiet structure on a quiet stretch of road. That night, the radio traffic spiked again. Arguments this time. One voice angry. Another firm. You don't have the right. We have the responsibility. You can't just take the transmission cut. When it came back, it was a different voice. Shorter. Colder. Non-cooperation will be noted. I turned the radio off for good. Some conversations are traps. Lying in bed that night, I realized something uncomfortable. I prepared for collapse. I hadn't prepared for replacement. Infected were simple. Terrifying, but simple. They followed rules that didn't change. People didn't. And now people were reorganizing, deciding who mattered, who didn't, who belonged inside, whatever came next. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around me. The fences would stop the wandering dead. They would not stop a knock. And the next knock wouldn't be asking for help. It would be asking for compliance. Or testing for it. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd have to decide something else. Not about survival. About alignment. Because in the world that was forming now, being left alone wasn't just a preference anymore. It was a stance. Chapter 11, the knock, came just after noon. Not a bang, not a shout. 3 measured raps, spaced evenly, like someone knocking on a neighbor's door instead of man's perimeter. I was in the barn when I heard through the open doors, across the yard, carried on still air. The sound didn't echo. It didn't rush. It waited. I shut the tractor down and listened. No engines idling. No raised voices. No dogs barking. That bothered me more than noise ever could. I took my time, washed my hands at the sink, dried them, put my boots back on, slung the rifle, not up, not hidden, just present. The pistol stayed where it always did. Habit is quieter than fear. When I stepped onto the porch, they were exactly where I expected them to be. 3 people at the gate. 2 men, 1 woman, all armed, all standing in the open, hands away from triggers. Their weapons were carried like tools, not threats. They wore mismatched gear, plates on one, chest rig on another, hunting jacket on the third, but the way they held themselves matched. That's what gave them away. They hadn't just found each other. They'd been assembled. The woman raised a hand, palm out. "Afternoon," she called. Her voice carried easy. Southern, but not local. "Name's Rachel. We're checking in with residents." I didn't answer right away. Silence is information. People reveal things when they rush to fill it. "We're not here to take anything," she continued. "Not here to cause problems." I walked down the steps and stopped short of the gate. Didn't open it. "What do you want?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Conversation. Behind her, one of the men scanned the fence line without trying to hide it. The other watched me and nothing else. "About what?" I said. "About the future," she replied. Of course it was. She talked first. I let her. They were organizing a safety corridor. Patrols, clearing teams, supply consolidation. Volunteers with skills, medical, mechanical, agricultural, were being logged and encouraged to relocate closer to town. In exchange, protection, shared resources, coordinated defense. She didn't say mandatory. She didn't have to. What if someone doesn't want to relocate? I asked. Rachel tilted her head. "We don't force people. But isolated properties are hard to protect." "That sounds like a warning," I said. She nodded once. "It's a fact." I looked past them, down the road. Empty, quiet. And if someone could protect themselves? I asked. Her eyes flicked to the fence. "The panels. The angles." "That depends," she said, "on whether self-protection becomes a liability." There it was. I leaned my weight back, casual. "Liability to who?" "To the corridor," she said. "To everyone." I almost laughed. Almost. I told her I wasn't interested. Not yet. Not ever, probably, but I didn't say that part. She accepted it too easily. "That's your right," she said. "For now." Then she handed me a laminated card through the gate. A frequency. A symbol. A time window. "If you hear something you don't understand," she said, "call it in. If you see infected movement in groups larger than 5, call it in. If you see outsiders behaving aggressively, call it in. And if I don't..." I asked. She met my eyes. "Then someone else will." They turned and walked back down the road without another word. I stood there long after they disappeared. The future had just knocked on my gate, and it knew my name. That night, the internet went dark. Not all at once. Not everywhere. Just patchy. Videos froze mid-sentence. Live streams ended abruptly. Comment sections filled with rumors, and then stopped loading entirely. The TV still worked, but the tone had changed. No more debates. No speculation. Just instructions. Stay inside. Avoid contact. Report unusual behavior. They showed footage of the infected again, new angles, closer this time. A man standing still, while 3 responders struggled to restrain him, his jaw working, teeth snapping at empty air even as his arm bent the wrong way under their grip. No reaction. No pain response. A woman reanimating on a hospital gurney. Eyes open, chest still, then moving with sudden, violent intent. They paused the footage and circled the head. "Only catastrophic trauma to the brain has proven effective," the anchor said. They didn't flinch saying it. I turned the TV off. The radio was worse. Panic bleeding through discipline. Units asking for clarification and not getting it. Civilians screaming into open channels before someone cut them off. One transmission stuck with me. "They're learning," a man said. "They're not fast, but they're not stupid. They follow noise. They stack up." Stack up. That's not a word you use for animals. That's a word you use for people. The next morning, smoke rose from the direction of town. Thin, controlled, intentional, clearing operations. I watched from the roof, binoculars steady. Vehicles moved in patterns now. Roads blocked, checkpoints erected. The corridor was becoming real, and the infected were being pushed away from town, away from control, away from order, out here, toward places like mine. By afternoon, I saw the first one on my land. Just one, shambling along the fence line, clothes torn, face slack, but eyes tracking movement. It ignored the birds, ignored the wind. It followed the line of wire like it meant something. Testing. I watched it until it wandered off. Then I started reinforcing the gate. Not because I expected a horde tonight, but because something had shifted. The world wasn't collapsing anymore. It was reorganizing. And whatever didn't fit was being pressed outward. Squeezed between teeth that didn't care whether you were alive or dead, as long as you didn't slow the machine down. I locked the gate at dusk and stood there a moment, hand on cold steel. Alone doesn't mean unnoticed anymore, I thought. It means undecided. And undecided people don't get to choose for long. Chapter 12, the first wave didn't come screaming. It came quiet. That was a mistake everyone made, thinking the infected announced themselves with noise, with chaos, with obvious intent. That only happened when they were close. When they were far out, pushed by pressure they didn't understand. They moved like water finding low ground. They came at dawn. I was already awake. Sleep had turned shallow the last few nights. Half dreams, half calculations. So when the dogs down the road started barking, I was upright before the sound finished traveling. I was on the roof platform with binoculars before the sun cleared the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Then movement. Tree line to the northeast. One shape became two. Then four. Then more, resolving out of shadow as the light grew stronger. They weren't clustered. They were spaced, drawn along old paths, drainage ditches, fence lines, features that had guided people once and now guided whatever was left of them. The corridor was working, which meant the pressure was real. I counted 12 in the first 10 minutes. None running, none vocalizing, just moving. I didn't fire. Not yet. Gunshots are invitations. They announce presence, capability, and location all at once. The infected would come, but so would anyone else listening. Instead, I watched. The first reached the outer fence line just after 7. It didn't rush it, didn't charge. It walked into it, leaned, hands fumbling at the wire until the mesh bit into rotting skin. It pushed harder, not reacting when it tore itself open, not slowing when the fence flexed. The T-post held. The fence bowed, sang, then sprang back. The infected stumbled, fell, got up again. Behind it, others arrived. They pressed, not together, not coordinated, but persistent. That was new. By mid-morning, there were 20. They wandered the perimeter, drawn by sound they couldn't identify. Wind through panels, the faint hum of the battery system, the low-frequency vibration of the house itself. One found the gate. It wrapped fingers through the chain link and pulled until its shoulder popped with a sound I heard from the roof. It didn't stop. Another walked straight into the solar array fence and leaned there, forehead resting against metal, like it was tired. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They weren't smart, but they were relentless, and they didn't need rest. I made the decision when the third fence section started to form. Controlled engagement, one at a time, quiet if possible. I climbed down, moved through the house, and out through the barn, staying below the tree line. Took position behind a berm I'd built months earlier to divert runoff. From there, I had a clean angle on the gate cluster. I lined up the first shot carefully. Head, side profile, minimal movement. The suppressed rifle coughed. The infected dropped like its strings had been cut. No scream, no alert. The second turned toward the sound, confused. I took it too. The third started to vocalize, a wet, gurgling moan, and I ended that before it finished. 3 bodies fell. The others noticed. Not fear. Attention. They began to drift toward the sound, pull like iron filings. I backed off, repositioned, waited. This became the rhythm of the day. Engage. Withdraw. Observe. Each shot bought me minutes. Each body reduced pressure, but also taught the rest where resistance lived. By noon, I'd put down 9. By 1, more were arriving. They weren't stopping. They were being fed into the rural zones by something deliberate. Around 2, the fence failed. Not catastrophically. 1 post gave way, leaning inward just enough to create slack. An infected slipped through sideways, skin peeling as wire bit deep. It fell inside the perimeter. That changed everything. I dropped it immediately, but the others saw the gap. They converged. I ran, not panicked, focused. Back to the house. Door closed. Bar dropped. Shutters locked. From the upper window, I engaged again, shots cracking sharper now that I'd ditched the suppressor. Sound discipline didn't matter anymore. The infected pressed against the fence, against the barn, against each other. One slammed into the side of the house, hard enough to rattle dishes. I shot it through the window. Then another. Then another. The noise carried. And with it, something else. I heard engines before I saw them. Trucks. Multiple. Stopping at a distance. Watching. I caught a glimpse of optics glinting from the tree line to the south. Observers. They weren't helping. They were assessing. I kept firing. By dusk, the infected lay in heaps along the fence line, tangled, broken, still. The pressure eased, not because they were gone, but because the flow had slowed. The corridor had pushed a surge. This was the result. I reloaded for the last time as the sun dipped low. Hands steady, movements automatic. When it was over, truly over, the land was quiet again. Too quiet. After dark, the radio crackled. A familiar voice. Good work today. Rachel. I didn't respond. You handled that well, she continued. Efficient. Disciplined. Minimal waste. Still silent. We noticed, she said. Others did too. I shut the radio off. But the message had already landed. They had tested the corridor. The corridor had tested me. And now everyone knew something important. The infected could be managed. The real question, the one that would decide what came next, was whether I could. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, rifle across my knees, listening to the house settle. The defenses had held. But defenses don't scare people. Capability does. And I had just shown mine to the wrong audience. Chapter 13, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because the math had changed. Waiting made sense when the threat was random, when danger wandered, when survival was about endurance. That phase was over. What had pushed against my fence was an accident, and the people watching from the trees weren't neutral. I'd been evaluated, which meant if I stayed still, the next move wouldn't be mine. So I made it mine. The first step was information. At first light, I walked the perimeter slow, rifle slung, pistol free. I checked every fence section, every post, every scrape in the dirt. I counted bodies, noted angles of approach, traced paths backward into the woods. The infected had come from 2 primary directions. Both followed old access routes, logging tracks, forgotten driveways, dry creek beds. That told me something important. They weren't just being pushed randomly. They were being guided by noise, by pressure, by clearing operations that didn't care where the spillover went, as long as it wasn't back toward town. I followed one of the paths north, staying light, moving through cover, careful not to silhouette myself. After half a mile, I found the first marker. White paint, same symbol as the card Rachel had given me. Painted on a tree, chest height, an arrow pointing away from town. That settled it. They weren't just defending. They were shaping. And anything outside the shape was expendable. I didn't go back home right away. Instead, I circled wide, keeping elevation, moving until I found what I suspected would be there. A listening post. 2 people, civilian gear, but disciplined. One on binoculars, one on radio. They were set up on a ridge with a clear view of my land and the access road. They weren't hiding well. They didn't expect resistance out here. I watched them for nearly an hour, learned their rhythms, their blind spots, their confidence. Then I made myself visible, not rushing, not aggressive, just walking into their field of view. They stiffened immediately. Weapons came up, but not aimed. Good. I stopped well short and raised one hand. "You've been watching my property," I said. One of them, a man in his 30s, nervous eyes, swallowed. "We're monitoring movement." "Movement you created," I replied. The other, older, steadier, didn't deny it. "We're preventing larger losses by pushing problems downhill," I said, "on to people who didn't agree to your plan." He studied me. "You handled it." "That wasn't permission," I said. Silence stretched. Finally, I said the thing that mattered. "You don't push infected toward my land again." The younger one laughed nervously. "You don't get to make that call." I looked at him then, really looked. "You think yesterday was me defending?" I asked. His smile died. "That was me demonstrating." I said, "Today is different." The older man raised a hand. "What do you want?" There it was. I told him. By noon, the markers were gone. By evening, the radio chatter changed. Routes adjusted. Pressure redirected east, toward open farmland already lost, toward areas no one had fortified or claimed. They didn't apologize. They didn't have to. They'd understood the message. But that wasn't enough, because understanding doesn't last unless it's reinforced. My second move was louder, but indirect. That night, I keyed the radio on the corridor frequency. "This is a general transmission," I said. "Any unit redirecting infected movement into occupied rural properties is creating secondary kill zones. Those zones are being defended." I paused. "If you push again," I continued, "you're not just risking civilians. You're forcing armed resistance into your own rear areas." I let that sink in. I don't want conflict. I want separation. Then I went quiet. I didn't sign off. I didn't need to. The response wasn't immediate. But it came. Different voices. Different tones. Questions. Clarifications. Careful language. Someone asked, "Are you coordinating independently?" I smiled to myself. "No," I said. "I'm staying put." Another voice cut in. "Who are you?" I looked out across my land, my fences, my fields, the bodies being dragged off by scavengers in the distance. "Someone you don't need to worry about." I replied, "Unless you make me." I shut the radio down. The third move was physical. I expanded. Not the house, the reach. Over the next 2 days, I cleared dead zones beyond my fence line. Quietly, methodically, I removed infected from the approaches they'd used before, dragged bodies into ravines, collapsed access paths, felled trees across old tracks. I wasn't claiming territory. I was denying utility. That's how you shape behavior. I left no markers, no symbols, just absence. By the end of the week, the pressure had shifted elsewhere. The corridor hardened. The infected flow thinned. And something else changed. People stopped watching me like a resource. They started watching me like terrain. Fixed, known, not easily moved. That was fine. Terrain doesn't get recruited. It gets worked around. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the radio crackled one last time. Rachel's voice. "You made your point," she said. I didn't answer. "We won't redirect into your sector again," she continued. "But this won't stay stable forever." I keyed the mic. "Nothing ever does," I said. "That's why I didn't ask for guarantees." She was quiet for a moment, then softer. "If things fall apart, they already have," I replied. "This is just what comes after." I turned the radio off for good. That night, for the first time since the outbreak began, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I'd stopped waiting. And in this new world, where the dead move without fear and the living reorganize without consent, that was the only advantage that lasted. If you want to keep going, the next arc can bring a direct test from the corridor leadership, a betrayal by someone local, or news from Kentucky that forces his ex-wife back into the story in a dangerous way. News from Kentucky that forces his ex-wife back into the story in a dangerous way. Chapter 14, the call came through a channel I hadn't checked in days. That alone told me something was wrong. I was in the barn, elbow deep in a generator housing, when a hand held on the bench crackled, low power, weak signal, but unmistakably hers. Not her voice. Her name, my call sign followed by hers, spoken by someone else. I froze. Any station receiving. This is Mara Collins requesting contact with Jack Miller. Repeat, requesting contact with... I dropped the wrench and keyed the mic. Mara, this is Jack. Who's with you? Static. Then a man's voice, strained, rushed. She's here. We're at a church outside Bardstown. We need help. My stomach tightened. Mara, I said, are you injured? A pause. Then her voice shaky but alive. Jack. It's bad. They lost control of the town. I leaned against the workbench. Closed my eyes. Kentucky. The corridor hadn't held. She told me in fragments. They'd tried to shelter in place at first. Her new husband, Evan, had believed the official guidance, trusted the town council, the county sheriff, the idea that help would come if they stayed compliant. Then the hospital failed. Then the shelter failed. Then the clearing teams came through, not to rescue, but to reorganize. People were told to relocate, to surrender weapons, to board transports heading south. Evan had argued. Someone had hit him. They'd run that night with a handful of others, carrying what they could. The church had been a fallback point. It was now surrounded, not by infected alone, by people. They say they're evacuating survivors, Mara whispered. But everyone who goes with them doesn't come back. My jaw tightened. Who's they? I asked. Not military. The man said, private trucks. Patches. They call it the Redeployment Authority. I exhaled slowly. That name meant consolidation, asset control, labor. What about infected? I asked. They're everywhere, he said. They use noise to herd them. Anyone who resists draws them in. Human weapons. I'd seen that before. Mara cut in again. Evan didn't make it. Silence followed. Not radio silence. The kind that happens when words fail. They broke his leg when he fell, she said softly. He told me to run. I closed my eyes. The past has a way of returning, not gently, but urgent. Mara, I said, steady now. How many with you? 6, she replied. 2 kids. Kids. That changed everything. Can you move? I asked. Not quietly, she said. They're watching the roads. I pictured the map in my head. Bardstown, secondary highways, creek crossings, old farm lanes. How long until they force entry? I asked. The man answered. By morning. I didn't hesitate. I'm coming, I said. Mara sucked in a breath. Jack, don't. It's too far. Not for me, I replied. She knew what that meant. She'd know me when distance was just another variable. I switched frequencies, broadcast short and clear. Any independent operators between southern Kentucky and northern Tennessee. I'm running a recovery. Non-combatants involved. Interference will be treated as hostile. I didn't wait for replies. The drive north was the most dangerous thing I'd done yet. Roadblocks abandoned in a hurry. Burned vehicles. Infected wandering aimlessly. Drawn to the engine noise until I cut power and coasted past them in silence. Twice I had to detour through fields. Once I had to clear a barn full of dead just to pass. By dawn, I was 2 miles out. I parked under cover and approached on foot. The church stood on a small rise, white paint stained dark at the base. Bodies lay scattered around a lot, some old, some not. Inside, I heard whispers. I tapped the window in the old signal. 2 knocks. Pause. 1 knock. Mara opened the door and froze. For a second, she looked at me like I was a ghost. Then she was crying into my chest. I held her there, rifle slung, eyes scanning past her shoulder. Let's move, I said. Now. They followed me through the woods as the sun rose behind us. We didn't take the roads. Didn't take the easy path. Behind us, engines started. Voices shouted. Gunfire cracked. I turned once. Took a shot that dropped a man with a radio, then kept moving. By noon, we crossed into Tennessee. By dusk, my land came into view. The gates opened, the fences closed, and Mara stood on my porch, looking at the farmhouse she'd once said was too quiet to survive in. Now it was the safest place she'd ever seen. She looked at me, eyes tired but alive. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I nodded. I did, I replied. That night, as the others slept, Mara sat with me on the porch. The world burned softly in the distance. They'll come looking, she said. I watched the tree line. I know, I replied. She studied me. You ready for that? I checked the rifle, the fences, the dark. For them? I said. I smiled faintly. I've been ready longer than they realize. Chapter 15, The Siege, didn't begin with gunfire. It began with mouths. More people than I'd ever intended to shelter stood in my kitchen by midnight. 6 from Kentucky, 3 locals who followed the noise and smoke, and Tom, who showed up with a pack, a shotgun, and the kind of look that said he already knew how bad things were. 9 adults, 2 kids, a community, whether I liked the word or not. Before anything else, I made rules. Not shouted, not barked, spoken calmly, like doctrine. No one wanders, I said. No one freelances. Food is accounted for. Water is accounted for. Weapons stay where I say they stay. Questions are fine. Arguments are not. No one argued. That told me who I was dealing with. Earning their place, I didn't assume usefulness. I tested for it. Mara helped immediately, no hesitation. She took the kids, calmed them, found blankets, set up a corner of the living room like she'd always been meant to manage chaos. She hadn't lost that part of herself. Maybe she never had. The others took longer. Caleb, early 20s mechanic's apprentice. Hands shook until I put tools in them. Then they steadied. He earned his place in the barn within an hour. Generator, tractor, battery bank. He listened. Ruth, mid-40s, former EMT. Quiet, watchful. She inventoried the med supplies without being asked and didn't complain when she saw how thin they were. Dennis, loud, opinionated, armed but careless. He talked about what should be done. I put him on latrine duty. He didn't like it. He did it anyway. The kids, Abby and Luke, 8 and 10, scared but observant. They followed rules better than most adults. Those who couldn't help physically helped by not being in the way. That mattered more than they realized. Sleeping arrangements we didn't pile together. That's how panic spreads. House, Mara, the kids, Ruth. Doors locked. Shutters closed at night. 2 escape routes pre-briefed. Barn loft, Caleb and Tom. Close to tools, close to perimeter. Workshop side room, Dennis and 2 others. Earplugs mandatory. Generator noise mask screams. Everyone slept in shifts. 2 on watch at all times. No exceptions. Food and water, I laid it out on the table. Hard numbers. Water, rain catchment plus gravity-fed filtration equals sustainable if disciplined. 1 gallon per person per day. No washing clothes unless authorized. No exceptions. Food, MREs for high-output days only. Canned goods rationed. Dry staples, rice, beans, oats measured weekly. Garden produce supplemental, not primary. Still weeks from real yield. I posted the ration board where everyone could see it. Transparency prevents resentment. Daily work rotations people need purpose. Or they invent bad ones. Morning. Fence repair clearing dead zones water system checks midday. Food prep medical checks tool maintenance evening. Watch briefings, radio monitoring, quiet hours, and force kids had jobs too. Sorting bolts, counting supplies, learning why rules existed. Fear shrinks when responsibility grows. Defenses, I explained this once, then made them walk it. Outer perimeter. Fences repaired, reinforced, noise traps reset outside the line. Draw infected away, not in. Inner perimeter. House and barn hard points. Covered lanes. Pre-marked firing angles. No crossfire. Fallback. Roof platform. Ladder removed when not in use. Final water cache stage there. I assigned sectors. No one guarded what they didn't understand. The siege begins 3 days later. The redeployment authority arrived. Not all at once. Scouts first. Drones. probing shots, then voices on loudspeakers. "You're harboring evacuees." I didn't answer. They tried negotiation. "You're not authorized." Still nothing. Then they push infected toward us again. That was a mistake. The community saw it happen, saw the shapes emerge from the tree line, heard it by noise generators and engines revving just out of sight. I didn't have to explain. They understood. We engaged as one. Tom held his sector steady. Ruth patched the graves without shaking. Caleb kept power online under pressure. Even Dennis followed instructions when the first body hit the wire. The infected fell. The fences held. And when the authority realized they weren't dealing with a lone man, but a functioning cell, they backed off. Not retreat, recalculation. That night, we sat together in the barn, exhausted, alive, no speeches, no promises, just shared silence. Finally, Mara spoke. "What happens now?" I looked around at the faces. Earned, not given. "We keep this small," I said. "We stay disciplined. We grow food. We trade information, not loyalty. Anyone who stays works. Anyone who can't work protects or teaches." "And if more people come?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Then we decide if they earn it." No one argued. Outside, the world was still burning. Inside, something fragile but real had formed. Not a fortress, not a militia, a holding pattern for humanity. And as I lay down for the first full sleep since the siege began, one thought stayed with me. I hadn't wanted community. But now that it existed, I would defend it like everything else I'd ever sworn protect. Chapter 16. The first harvest food changes people. Not when it's scarce. That just makes them afraid. It changes them when it appears. When something green pushes up through dead soil and reminds everyone that the future might still be negotiable. That was a mistake. The corn came in uneven, stunted in places where the soil had been compacted too long before I ever touched it. The beans did better. The potatoes surprised me. Small but dense, stubborn things that didn't care what the world was doing above them. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was enough to prove a point. And proof travels. We harvested at dawn, quiet and deliberate. No celebration. No raised voices. Everyone knew the rule. Food stays invisible until it's eaten or stored. Mara ran the kids through sorting and cleaning. Ruth oversaw inspection. Anything questionable got tossed. No risks. No sentiment. Caleb built drying racks from scrap lumber and old fencing wire. We ran solar fans low and steady. Pulled moisture without advertising heat signatures. By noon, the first sacks were sealed and labeled. Calories, dates, locations. Dennis stared at the shelves like he was looking at gold. I caught that look, and I logged it. That afternoon, the radio changed tone again. Less command, more bargaining. Any independent growers willing to coordinate distribution. Trade opportunities available. Security in exchange for surplus. They didn't know how much we had, but they knew someone did. I shut the radio off and told Tom to double the outer watch. That's when the first shot came. Not close. A test. They didn't come as infected. That's what made it worse. 3 men at first, walking the access road like they belonged there. Weapons slung casual. Hands open. Smiles ready. I met them at the gate with Mara behind me and Tom on overwatch. "We heard you've got crops," the tallest said. "Figured neighbors should talk." "You heard wrong," I replied. He smiled wider. Funny thing about rumors. The second man glanced past me, eyes tracking the barn, the roof line, the fence repairs. Predators always count exits first. "We're willing to trade," the tall one said. "Protection. Ammo. Fuel." I shook my head. "We don't trade with people who bring guns to ask for vegetables." The smile faded. "Everyone's got to eat," he said. "So do we," I replied. They left, too easily. That night, someone tried to cut the south fence. Didn't get far. Noise trap tripped. Floodlights snapped on. Tom fired a warning shot that sent them running. We found footprints the next morning. 6 this time. Not starving. Organized. I called a meeting in the barn. No speeches. Just facts. "The harvest makes us a target," I said. not because it feeds us, but because it could feed others. Dennis spoke up. We should show strength. Make an example. Ruth shot him a look. Examples escalate. Caleb said quietly, if they know we have food, they'll keep coming. All eyes turned to me. I nodded, which is why I said, we don't look like we have food anymore. Adaptation, we change posture overnight. Fields, half left unharvested, intentionally damaged, trampled, burned in places. Make it look like a loss. Storage, food redistributed into caches, house, barn, buried drums, roof reserve. No single point of failure. Routine, cooking smells eliminated. Cold meals, solar ovens only at peak daylight when smoke blends. Trade signals, none. No radio chatter. No markers. No lights. We became smaller, harder to read. It didn't work. Because hunger doesn't care about deception. They came 3 nights later. Not scouts. Not negotiators. A dozen men moving fast, confident. Not redeployment authority. Worse. Freelancers. They used the infected as cover. Drove a group toward the east fence with engines and noise, then swung wide while we were engaged. That part was smart. What they didn't account for was discipline. Tom held fire until they crossed a marker, then dropped the lead man with a single shot. Chaos followed. Shouting. Return fire. One of them screaming, as infected latched on where they'd lost control of the push. We didn't chase. We didn't gloat. We contained. Mara ran ammo. Ruth treated a shrapnel cut without looking up. Caleb rerouted power when a round clipped a panel. Dennis froze. I grabbed him by the collar, dragged him into cover. Breathe, I said, or leave. He breathed. He stayed. By the time it ended, 4 attackers were dead. 2 infected burned. The rest fled. They took nothing, but they learned something. Aftermath, we buried the bodies away from the land. Not as kindness, as sanitation. No markers. No warnings. Just absence. That night, the kids slept through the dark for the first time since arriving. Mara sat with me on the porch, knees drawn up, staring at the fields. I never thought food would make things worse, she said. I nodded. It always does. Eventually. She looked at me. Is this sustainable? I thought about the soil, the water, the people, the pressure. Yes, I said, but not quietly. Going forward, the community had crossed a line. Not morally. Strategically, we were no longer surviving. We were producing, which meant the future would test us harder, not with the dead, but with the living. I looked at the land one last time before turning in. The crops that had drawn blood, the fences that held, the people who had earned their place. This wasn't a farm anymore. It was leverage. And leverage, once revealed, demands a choice. Hide it forever, or decide who it's for. Chapter 17, The Shape of Hunger Betrayal, never announces itself. It doesn't stride in with a gun or a confession. It starts small, missed looks, hands lingering too long near storage. Questions asked sideways instead of straight. Hunger sharpens it. Fear just gives it permission. The first sign was the beans. 2 jars missing from cache C. Not a lot. Not enough to set off alarms. Enough to make me stop and recount everything twice. I didn't accuse anyone. Accusations fracture groups faster than bullets. Instead, I watched. People reveal themselves when they think they're unseen. Dennis started skipping meals. At least publicly. He'd poke at his portion, make jokes about not being hungry, then linger after cleanup like he'd forgotten something. I caught him once in the barn at night, sitting on a crate, chewing slowly in the dark. He froze when he saw me. Couldn't sleep, he said. I nodded, said nothing, logged it. Fear makes people hoard, quietly at first. The second sign was a radio. A transmission I hadn't authorized went out on a short window. Low power, but enough. Caleb caught in the logs. Not content. Timing. Someone had broadcast during the only 15-minute gap, when both perimeter watchers were occupied elsewhere. That meant planning. That meant intent. I called a work day. Hard labor. Fence reinforcement. Clearing brush. Digging drainage trenches by hand. Fatigue strips masks. Dennis lagged early, complained about calories, about fairness, about how some people were more prepared than others. Mara shut him down. Ruth watched him like she'd watched patients right before they panicked. The kid stayed close to her. Smart. That night, the dogs down the road barked again. Different this time. Closer. I was on the roof when I saw the light flicker at the edge of the field. Brief, intentional, shielded. A signal. Not infected. People. I traced it back to the south fence. And Dennis was missing from his bunk. I didn't raise the alarm. Not yet. I took Tom and moved quiet, wide, slow. We found Dennis at the culvert, crouched low, whispering to shapes in the dark. They've got food, he hissed. Stored. More than they say. You help me, I get you in. One of the shapes laughed softly. Hunger laughs like that. Thin, mean. I stepped out of the dark. Dennis, I said. He spun, gun halfway up before he recognized me. His face collapsed. Fear, naked. I didn't mean he started. I didn't let him finish. I fired once. Not at him. At the dirt between his feet. He dropped the gun and fell backward. The shapes in the dark scattered. I dragged Dennis back myself. No yelling. No spectacle. Just consequence. The reckoning at dawn. I gathered everyone in the barn. Dennis sat on a crate, wrists zip-tied, eyes red and hollow. I laid it out. What he'd done. What he'd offered. What it would have cost us. No embellishment. No anger. Why? Mara asked quietly. Dennis looked at the floor. I was scared, he said. I didn't think we could last. I thought, if I had an out. Fear speaks plainly when cornered. Tom crossed his arms. You sold us out. Dennis shook his head violently. Not yet. I stopped. You got caught, Ruth said. Silence. The kids weren't there. I'd made sure of that. Judgment communities fail when leaders pretend betrayal is rare. It isn't. It's inevitable. What matters is what you do with it. I didn't ask for votes. I didn't put it to debate. That creates factions. Instead, I explained the options. Dennis can't stay, I said. He knows too much. He's already broken trust. Mara swallowed. You're sending him out there? Yes. Tom nodded once. Ruth looked away, but didn't object. Dennis started crying. Ugly. Loud. Human. I'll work, he begged. I'll do anything. I crouched in front of him. You already did, I said, and now I have to protect everyone else. I cut the ties. Gave him a pack. A bottle of water. A knife. No gun. I walked him to the gate myself. He didn't look back when he left. That hurt more than if he had. Aftermath, no one spoke much that day. Work got done anyway. It always does. That night, Mara sat beside me again. Was there another way? She asked. I thought about it. No, I said. Just slower ones. She nodded, eyes wet. Will it happen again? Yes. She leaned into me, not like before, not like memory, but like someone who understood the cost of staying. Then what do we do? She asked. I looked out at the fields, the fences, the people moving with purpose despite the weight. We keep being worth protecting, I said, and we stay honest about how fragile this is. Later, alone, I checked the perimeter. No sign of the group Dennis had contacted. Yet, but betrayal leaves ripples. They'd test us again, maybe harder, because now they knew something else. Not just that we had food, but that fear lived inside the walls. And fear unmanaged is the most dangerous infection of all. Chapter 18, Winter, Decisions. And the edge of everything winter came slow, gray and bitter, not the quiet kind that blankets everything in snow and muffled sound. No, this was sharp, brittle, the kind that seeps into bones and rattles your teeth even inside a house with a fire burning. By late December, the harvest was gone, stored, eaten, or lost. Water froze in the troughs despite the heaters I'd cobbled together. Rationing was no longer a choice. It was mandatory. Calories counted per person, per task. Every step outside burned more than anyone admitted. The community was tense. Mara and Ruth managed morale quietly, but the air itself carried impatience. Dennis' absence had left a shadow, but I felt it more as a lesson. Fear is patient. Hunger is patient. Both work slowly, invisibly, until they break you. Rationing decisions I called a council, small, decisive. Food lasts 2 more weeks at current use, I said. After that, we reduce rations by 20% per person. Mara swallowed. Luke and Abby peeked from the doorway, aware of the stakes without words. Caleb asked, "And water?" "Filtered snow, mostly," I said. "We'll rotate collection points. No extra use. No exceptions." Tom nodded. "Discipline only works if everyone buys in, which is why," I said, "we have to assume the worst. That includes people outside." Ruth's face hardened. "So you mean anyone at the gate?" "Yes," I said. "If they approach during these conditions, they come under scrutiny. We survive first. Negotiation second." Even the kids understood. Discipline had become the first shield. The approach it began with snow-slick tracks across the north field. 2 groups converging at once. The first was a returning faction, the Redeployment Authority, 10 strong, armed, disciplined. Their plan clear: seize food, control the corridor. The second was Dennis, returning with a small band of opportunists, 6 people desperate enough to try their luck, armed with scavenged rifles, knives, and improvised explosives. They'd survived, learned, and returned with audacity. The dead followed, not immediately, but soon enough, a herd driven by noise from the south, pushed inadvertently by one of the authorities' trucks. I watched from the roof platform, breath visible in the cold, rifle ready. The gates were locked, the fences reinforced, spikes sharpened along perimeter weak points. The fire barrels burned low along the barn edge. They didn't know yet who I was, only that someone was defending the property. That hesitation is gold in combat. The first contact Dennis group hit first, attempting the east fence. I fired a warning shot into the snow. 1 man fell, tripped on ice. Panic rippled through their ranks. Caleb and Tom engaged, shouting commands. Mara kept the kids away. Ruth treated minor injuries without flinching. Then the authority arrived on the west side, coordinated, vehicles skidding in snow. They didn't engage immediately. They weren't stupid. They were assessing. The infected heard the commotion. A moan carried across the frozen fields. Within seconds, figures emerged from the tree line, limbs stiff, eyes hollow, teeth snapping to the frozen air. Suddenly, the battlefield was 3 fronts. Dennis' group trying to infiltrate, authority testing perimeter weakness, and a small herd of reanimated pressing the pressure from the south. The siege, the first casualties, came fast. Dennis, second in command, tripped over barbed wire, snapped his neck against a post as he fell. 2 infected latched onto him, slowing the rest. A grenade, homemade, tossed by one of Dennis' desperate men, went off near the east fence. Snow flew. A few of the dead scattered confused, but 3 of Dennis' group went down in fire and ice. On the west side, the authority moved with precision. They fired suppressive rounds, trying to push our defenses. One of my outer lights went out. A panel was ripped from the fence. I countered with deliberate fire, picking off the tallest target visible. Caleb laid down, covering fire. Tom engaged 2 infiltrators, attempting to climb over a collapsed section of wire. Mara fired a sawed-off shotgun, striking one near the barn. Close combat by nightfall, the snow was red and black. Smoke from fire barrels swirled in the air, obscuring everything beyond 15 yards. Dennis' remnants tried to regroup near the southern orchard. The infected, drawn to the noise, swarmed over them, scattering bodies. Only 1 made it to cover. The authority regrouped, realizing the dead were now a variable they couldn't control. They called out over megaphones, offering surrender and negotiation, but it was too late. Discipline had turned into survival instinct. I moved through the barn, barricading doors, firing from windows, keeping the community consolidated. Mara and Ruth moved silently between floors, distributing extra rounds, patching minor wounds. Caleb moved silently, repositioning improvised barricades, ensuring sight lines and fire lanes covered both south and east approaches. Casualties and costs by dawn, the snow was thick and quiet again. From my vantage point, Dennis' group was gone, either dead or fled, leaving scattered bodies and discarded weapons. The authority had retreated, leaving 2 wounded behind. I did not pursue. Infected were thinned, but enough remained that caution remained paramount. Inside, one community member sprained an ankle. Minor cuts. No one else physically harmed. But the psychological toll was heavy. Everyone had seen what fear could do, and who survived because of discipline rather than luck. The aftermath we gathered in the barn, exhausted, faces streaked with soot and snow. Mara held the kids close. Ruth counted supplies. Caleb inspected the fences again. I addressed the group. Winter will push harder. Hunger will push harder. Fear will push harder. The outside world isn't going to negotiate. It's going to take what it can. We've defended this place once. We can do it again. But it only works if we follow the rules. No exceptions. No shortcuts. No hesitation. Silence. Then Mara nodded. We follow you, she said, because you've made us worth protecting. I looked at each face. Exhaustion, fear, resolve. We had survived the siege, but that survival carried a cost. Vigilance, sacrifice, and the unspoken understanding that winter would strip everything else away if we faltered. Outside, the snow fell thicker. The dead stirred faintly along the perimeter, and somewhere beyond the tree line, both human factions were licking wounds, nursing grudges, and reconsidering their strategies. Inside, we were a community, fragile, disciplined, and armed. And I realized, for the first time, we might just have a future worth defending. Chapter 19, What Endures Winter, Try to Kill Us Slowly. That's the truth of it. Not with one final test or a dramatic last stand, but with mornings where fingers wouldn't bend, with nights when fire burned low and the wind found every crack we hadn't sealed, with hunger that didn't scream, just whispered. We survived it anyway, not intact, not unchanged, but alive. By February, the ration cuts hurt. Everyone lost weight. Tempers shortened. Small mistakes carried bigger consequences. We buried one infected that had frozen solid against the outer fence and left it there for 2 days because no one had the energy to drag it away until the weather broke. But the system held. That was the difference. No one freelanced. No one stole. No one ran. The kids learned to split kindling and count calories before they learned their multiplication tables. Mara taught them how to read, whether like scripture, clouds, wind shifts, pressure drops. Ruth ran daily checks like a ritual. Caleb kept power alive through cannibalized parts and quiet miracles. Tom aged 10 years but never missed a watch. And me? I stopped thinking like a man defending land. I started thinking like someone guarding continuity. Spring to thaw came late. When it did, the land looked wounded. Fences bowed, fields scarred. Scattered remains told stories no one wanted to revisit. But the soil was still good. We planted again, this time smarter. Smaller plots, staggered locations, hidden growth under trellises and brush. No single harvest. No obvious success. We learned how to look poor without becoming it. Word traveled anyway, but differently now. People didn't come demanding. They came asking. Quiet traders. Scouts from enclaves further out. A few families with skills and no illusions. We turned most away. Took in 2, carefully, slowly, after weeks of observation. The rule never changed. Earn it. The world beyond the fence, the redeployment authority, didn't come back. Not in force. We heard what happened to them over the radio months later. Fractured leadership, internal violence, absorption by something larger and worse further south. Control without legitimacy always collapses inward. The freelancers fared worse. Hunger doesn't reward cruelty for long. As for the infected, they never went away, but they thinned. Cold slowed them. Distance scattered them. Organized communities learned how to manage noise, movement, and pressure. The dead became a fact of geography instead of an apocalypse. Dangerous. Predictable. What we became by summer. The farmhouse wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a node. Quiet. Unadvertised. Respected. We didn't fly flags or paint symbols. We didn't broadcast strength. We practiced it. People knew not to push infected toward us. People knew not to test offense. People knew that if they came honestly, hungry but willing to work, they might be heard. That was enough. Tomorrow one night, late, we sat on the porch again. Same place, different world. She didn't ask to stay. She already had. "What do you call this?" she asked, looking out at the fields, the lights, the quiet motion of people who knew their roles. I thought about it. "A holdfast," I said finally. "Not a town, not a bunker, a place that refuses to collapse." She smiled faintly. "You always did hate extremes." I nodded. "They make you careless." She rested her head against my shoulder, not as my past, not as something reclaimed, as someone who'd survived the same fire and chosen the same ground. The ending that isn't the world didn't end. It narrowed, then it reconnected, slowly, unevenly, painfully. Some places fell, some hardened, some adapted. We were one of the ones that adapted. Jack Miller, ex-Marine, divorced, retired to a quiet farm. I'd come here to disappear. Instead, I became something else. Not a leader people followed because they loved me. A custodian of systems that worked when everything else failed. And when I stood on the roof one last time that year, watching kids run between rows of crops that would mature, hearing laughter mix with the hum of batteries and the soft click of a rifle being cleaned nearby, I understood something simple and permanent. Survival isn't about being alone. It's about choosing what you refuse to abandon. We refuse to abandon discipline. We refuse to abandon each other. And in a world full of... That's it for today's story. We will love to see you again soon. Thanks for listening, and most importantly, stay safe out there.